Hi, this is Jon May with Fathom Realty with part 2 of my for sale by owner advice. So you found a buyer, now what? There's an easy two-step process that's worked well for hundreds of for sale by owners. Step 1, the buyer and seller agree on a letter of intent. And step 2, have your attorney prepare the contract and provide a to-do list for both sides. Now, a letter of intent is an agreement to negotiate in good faith towards an eventual contract. And if you need a simple letter of intent form, email me at jmay@ggrva.com with for sale by owner letter of intent in the subject line, and I'll send you one, no cost or obligation. The purpose of the letter of intent is to set forth the most important aspects of the transaction: the price, possession date, and any seller contributions to the buyer's closing costs. Now, once you've reached an agreement on the letter of intent, send it to your attorney and they'll start processing the contract. In many cases, they can usually have a contract prepared the same day. The contract will define the details of the transaction and is a binding commitment on both parties. Oral agreements are not binding. There are no cooling off periods to change your mind unless specifically provided in the written agreement. After signing the contract, any changes must be agreed by both parties. Now, be certain you understand and agree to all its terms. Every word is there for a reason and carries obligations and responsibilities. Every term is also subject to negotiation and change. Your attorney will go over the contract with you and provide a detailed to-do list to guide you through the closing. I do not recommend you use an office supply store contract form, as they're not legally enforceable in most cases and do not contain required protective disclosures. I also do not recommend that you borrow a contract from an agent. Unless an agent produced the buyer and processed the paperwork, there's a lot of stuff in there that those contracts are just going to muddy the water. Real estate forms are complicated and require many additions to cover various contingencies and disclosures required by law. Even if you think you understand the form, you might not be fully aware of your rights and responsibilities. An incomplete or misunderstood form can only get you in trouble. Use a real estate attorney if a real estate agent is not involved. Here's a summary of seller and buyer obligations under the contract. Now, this list is not exclusive and there are many other provisions in the contract. The attorney will explain these to you. For the seller is obligated to deliver a clear title to the real estate and all personal property listed in the contract. The property may be subject to normal subdivision easements and covenants, and the contract provides the structure conveys in its present condition, but that appliances, heating and air conditioning, plumbing, electrical, mechanical systems are to be in normal working order at the time of settlement. That's not new condition. The house must be in broom swept when the buyer takes possession, which is usually on the settlement date. The buyer and seller will do a final inspection shortly before closing, and you should get estimates and try to resolve any repair issues before coming to settlement. Now, if there is a mandatory homeowners association, the seller must provide the buyer with a disclosure packet, and I'm going to discuss that in my next video. For the buyer, the contract usually contains a contingency that releases the buyer if the lender denies the loan. The buyer must diligently pursue loan approval and deliver a firm commitment with an agreed time, or the seller may cancel the contract. Now, the buyer is obligated to settle on the date specified. Lack of down payment funds is no excuse and will put the buyer in default. The buyer may apply for financing other than those specified in the contract, but must obtain the seller permission to do so. The lender will provide the buyer with a good faith estimate of closing costs. Often the seller will agree to pay some of the buyer's closing costs as part of the purchase price. And if the buyer needs to sell a house before buying a new one, the contract should be made contingent on that sale. Termite, well, radon, home and septic inspections may also be required. Well, that's all for this segment. Join me on part 3 while I'll go over your long to-do list before settlement. For more information for home sellers, join me for a free home sellers webinar. You can register at www.freehomesellerswebinar.com.